Well, good evening, everybody. And tonight we have a new microphone and a new camera. So we're really becoming very high tech. This is we're moving into the stratospheres now that we are working on our 3rd million followers.
Whoa.
You know that, Yosef, right? I'm working on my 3rd million followers. You know why? I gave up on the first 2. I'm working on the 3rd million now. Okay. Anyway, so we're in the Gemara. We're learning Tractate Megilla, and it's Daf Ches Amid Beis. If you have an Art Scroll Gemara and you're following along, it would be 8b1. You want me to show you? That's a Yud, and that would be Tes. So this is Ches Amid Beis. That's the second sign. Okay. So we're on Ches Amid Beis, and we're at one of the Mishnahs. We are at the Mishnah, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from the wide lines.
Mm-hmm.
When you're counting the wide lines, you'll go down 6 lines from the beginning of the wide lines, and you'll see in the middle of that line, there's bold, larger letters, Mem, Taf, Nun, and Yud. You see that? See it? That's Aramaic for Mishnah, Masnisin. Masnisin is Aramaic for Mishnah. So that's what you're looking at over there, the beginning of a new Mishnah. Now, I don't know, we're going to get through, I think, today's section with the Gemara, but it's going to require a lot of introduction. So the whole section that we're going through now, we will bring that back up again, is that we started off saying the Mishnah made a statement that Ein Bain, there's no difference between the first Adar and the second Adar other than the reading of the Megillah. That's what the Mishnah had said. Once the Mishnah introduced that syntax, there's no difference between this and that other than, the Mishnah has been digressing into many different laws in the Torah where there's 2 types of the same law. And the Mishnah has been introducing us to, well, there's no difference between this and that other than. So tonight we're getting a new one. Tonight, and a little bit the Gemara is going to borrow from the topic we were talking about before. Tonight we're going to talk about the Metzora. Who was the Metzora? Metzora is loosely translated in English as leprosy. It was a skin disease. But it was not the skin disease that modern medicine calls leprosy, because in actuality, it was a spiritual malady that manifested itself in a physical presence, but in actuality, it was a spiritual malady. And the spiritual malady came because people were speaking Lashon Hara. And it would manifest itself. We're just going to talk tonight. There is tsaras on a person. A person could become a tzara. A garment could become mitzora. It could be a tzaras on a garment. And a bayit. You could have tzaras on your house. A person can have tzaras on their house. Okay? Mostly we're going to be talking about human tzaras tonight. We're going to touch on the house tzaras partially, but mostly our conversation is going to be about human tzaras. So the breakdown. In its simple form, of course, it is way, way more complicated. But for purposes of our learning tonight, we're going to try to simplify it as much as possible. A person wakes up one morning and he has one of these lesions on his body. It manifests itself the way the Torah describes it, as a whiteness. Now, the whiteness, in contrast to the rest of his body, does not look, it has to have a look where it looks deeper than the skin, even though it's still skin deep. But the look, when you compare the white skin of this lesion to the rest of the color of his skin around him, it has to look deeper. That's one of the biblical requirements for it to be actual tzaras. And there's a whole bunch of other requirements. It has to have yellow hair instead of black hair coming out of it, etc. So there's a whole bunch of different requirements. If it only has some of the requirements and not all of the requirements, So the first person the guy has to go to is the Kohen. The Kohanim were the experts on being able to define tzaras. What was their job? Okay, we'll digress to a Hasidic conversation before we even get back to this. Okay? In the Second Temple era, the Kohanim were, in the First Temple era, most of the time, the Kohanim were not just by birth Kohanim, they were actual Torah scholars. Almost all the Kohanim were Torah scholars. Second Temple era, it wasn't like that. The vast majority of the Kohanim were not Torah scholars. They were simple folk. So if a Kohen is just a simple guy, he wouldn't know a tzaras from a not tzaras if it punched him in the face. For that, you needed to be a Torah scholar or a rabbi, etc. So the Gemara says, not here, this is in discussing the laws of tzaras, that if a person had tzaras, presenting himself to the Kohen wasn't going to help because the Kohen wasn't the expert on determining this. So he had to go to the rabbi. What would happen? He would go to the rabbi, and the rabbi would take him to the Kohen. And the rabbi would say to the Kohen, tell this guy he is tamei, he's impure. What he has is real tzaras. Or tell this guy he's okay at the end of the time, period, etc. And then the Kohen would make the pronouncement. Got it? So Chassidus asks a question. What is this up? A game? Okay, I understand that the Torah says that the Kohen needs to be the one who pronounces it, and that's why the rabbi is going to the Kohen and having the Kohen make the pronouncement, because the Torah is very specific. But why? Why did it have to be the Kohen who made why in fact does the Torah insist that the Kohen make the pronouncement and that the rabbi has to therefore go to the Kohen, even though it's ultimately the rabbi who's rendering the ruling on whether or not this guy is a tzaras? Everybody understands the question? Simple. Yeah. Chassidus explains as follows. On a mystical level, the Kohen, the symbolism of a Kohen is called Ish HaChesed. The Kohen is a man who manifests kindness. The symbolism of the Kohen on a mystical level, even on a midrashic level, is you're talking about somebody who is kind. Now, the result of somebody being rendered tzaras, he is not only tamei, he's literally kicked out of the camp. He has to go chutz to shalosh machnas. In the desert, it meant he had to leave the clouds of glory. In the land of Israel, it meant he had to leave the city. There's three areas: Machna Kahuna, Hashem's camp, which is the base of English itself. Then it was Machna Leviyah, and then there was in other words, there was the Oil Moed, the tent of the meeting in the base of Mikdash. Then there was the Levite tribe lived around it. That was the second encampment, and then there was the rest of the Jewish people who encamped around that. So a person who was tzaras had to leave all three camps. He wasn't allowed in. So basically what you're doing is you're taking a Jew. What's the symbolism? You're taking a Jew and you're saying, you have fallen so far from your relationship with Hashem that the only way for you to rebuild you need an intervention. You're going to need an intervention. You're going to need a heavy-duty dose of tough love to get you started, to kickstart you back on the path of rebuilding your relationship with Hashem. You're going to need tough love. Okay? And we all know people that go through such experiences. We all know of such type of existence, right? So the Torah tells us, as Chassidus, that don't just throw around this tough love thing with impunity. If you're going to try to impose tough love on somebody, you better be the Kohen Ish HaChesed. you better make darn sure that before you impose quote unquote tough love on someone, before you bring an intervention to somebody's life, before you tell somebody you stink so badly, you're going to have to get out of here for now until you can clean up a little bit. Spiritually, I'm talking about. Before you say that to somebody, you better make sure that you're coming from a place of love. And so even though it's the rabbi who's the great sage, who's the one who's supposed to be imposing this, but he still needs the Kohen to remind the rabbi that what he's about to do is tell somebody you're not welcome in the congregation of the Jewish people. You're not welcome here right now. Until you can clean up your act, you're not welcome here. You better make sure that you're not being vengeful, that you're not being mean-spirited, that you're not trying to show who's boss. You better make darn sure that where that's coming from is love, kindness, that you truly, truly realize that you've exhausted every possible option for purifying that person, for cleansing them through love. And you've exhausted all options, and then and only then are you going to impose upon him an intervention, tough love. And that's why the rabbi has to go to the Kohen to remind himself always to be chesed. Nice? Okay. So now back to the original story. So what happens is this. He comes to the Kohen looks at it, and like I said, there's a whole bunch of different things that are necessary for him to truly be tzaras. If he doesn't have all of those signs yet, but he has some of them, then the Kohen puts him in quarantine. This is where Fauci got it from. Just saying. People say, Rabbi, come on, you got to avoid the politics. But there are certain things that are just softballs. They're just pitching me softballs, waiting for me to hit them out of the park. Where's the huge apology to the quote-unquote anti-vaxxers? Where's the apology?
Have you heard about his diary?
I heard about it. Someone was telling me just yesterday. Someone was just telling me.
It's really funny.
Somebody was telling me about it yesterday. Right? Where's the apology to those of us that said, this is suspicious, I'm not doing this. Where's the apology?
He pled the fifth 111 times.
Can you imagine? Chutzpah. What a chutzpah. Anyway, let's go back to this. So the Kohen puts him in quarantine because we have to see, is this tzaras, this biblical leprosy, spreading? Is it going to get smaller? Is it going to stay the same? Okay? And there's a bunch of complicated laws that go into that are not necessarily that important to our Gemara tonight. And so therefore I'm not going to go through all of the laws of tzaras. 2 whole Torah portions and tractates of Talmud discussing it. Okay? But the bottom line is, there's a quarantined tzaras, and then there's a guy who actually has tzaras. Let's say the guy has all 3 signs. The first time he comes to the Kohen. Or just another example could be, like I said, I want to make this complicated. He comes to the Kohen, he doesn't have all the signs. The Kohen quarantines him, and when the Kohen comes back a week later, 7 days of quarantine, when the Kohen comes back to examine him 7 days later, it's spread. Ooh, bad. Okay, then he's a real tzaras, complete and total. So we refer to these two different types of tzaras. One we call tzarat musgar, which means locked up, soger, like a locked up door, okay? One is a Mitzorah who's locked up, he's in quarantine. The other is called a Mitzorah muchlat, that he's absolutely, it's done, he's a complete Mitzorah, okay? Those are the 2 types. And we're about to enter into a Mishnah that's going to say, there's no difference between these 2 types of tzaras, except for, we're going to see what the exceptions are. Okay? All that was introduction. Now we can jump in. Any questions on the introduction? Probably not. Pretty clear. The Mishnah says as follows. Ein bein mitzora musgar lemitzora muchlat. There is no difference between the quarantined mitzora, the one who's locked up, the mitzora muchlat, and the mitzora who is absolutely, completely, and totally a mitzora. There's no differences other than ella, priya, uprima. The two things that are different, that the mitzora musgar does not have to grow out his hair, okay? Which the mitzora muchlat does. He's not allowed to cut his hair. The whole time he's at tzaras, he's not allowed to cut his hair. And the second thing is rending his garments. He has to, Rahman al-Islam, none of us should ever know from it, but you've seen people who are sitting shiva, they have to tear their garments. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Hopefully you'll never see it. Okay. So similarly, a mitzora muchlat, someone who's been established that he is in fact actually a mitzora, has to rend his garments. He has to tear his garments. Okay? Both of them are sent away. But one is just in quarantine. The one that's in quarantine does not have to let his hair grow and does not have to tear his garments. The one who's been established as an actual mitzora, he has to rend his garments and he has to let his hair grow out. That's the first ain bein.
To the same place?
We're going to get into that in the Gemara. Okay? Then the second thing we have a second ain bein, also in reference to these two guys. Ain bein tahar mitoch hezger. Now, so let's give another example. Let's go with one more thing. The guy gets put in quarantine. At the end of the 7 days, the Kohen comes to check on him, and actually, the tzaras has gotten smaller. He's healing. And again, it doesn't look deeper than the skin, etc. It doesn't have any of the things, and it itself has shrunk. So he never was actually declared a full-on mitzora. He was only locked up for 7 days in quarantine because we weren't sure if he was a mitzora. And at the end of those 7 days, we're now rendering him not a mitzora anymore. That person is still tamei. But his cleansing process, his purification process, is different than the mitzora who was a complete and total mitzora. The guy who was full on had all the signs, etc., had to tear his garments, had to let his hair grow, etc. Once it's healed, he has to go through a much more extensive purification process than the guy who only was quarantined for 7 days and now is being purified. Everybody got that? Okay, that's the second clause of the Mishnah. So the second clause of the Mishnah is Ein bein tahar mitoch hezger. There's no difference between the purification process for someone who is quarantined, the tahar mitoch hechlet, relative to the person purifying himself because he was a complete and total mitzora. Ella tiglachas, he has to now shave all his hair, right? The full-on mitzora had to let his hair grow. At the end of the process, once he's healed, he has to shave off all of his hair, literally all of his hair. His arm hairs, his eyebrows, etc. Everything has to get shaved. His legs.
When they're doing this, are they telling the guy that this is like a punishment?
Everyone knew it was for Lashon Hara. On the contrary.
It's very embarrassing for the person.
Yeah, tummy yikra. You're going to see. He had to stand outside when the guy who was muchlat, the guy who was completing total tzaras. He not only had to be sent out of the camps, but he had to declare himself. Anybody, don't come near me. I'm tummy, I'm impure.
But shaving the hair isn't because of a punishment.
What?
Shaving the hair isn't because of a punishment.
It's part of the cleansing. That's all part of the cleansing. Is this working? Hello. I don't think we're getting sound.
No.
Testing. Why is the sound not working all of a sudden? Oh, there it was. Okay, it woke up. I know what it was. Wait, now it says it shut off.
Now it's red.
Yeah, in the bottom right corner, it looks like you're getting activity every time it's happening.
Now it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, back to this. So this guy who's now saying tummy. So when he goes to cleanse himself, in other words, he's finally every 7 days the Kohen will go check on him. The guy who's become completely tummy, impure, the Kohen's going to go check on him every 7 days to see how he's doing. And then once he gets healed, his healing process and his purification process is much more extensive. Let's go. I don't remember which one of you asked the question. We say that tzaras comes because of lashon hara, because a person is speaking lashon hara. That's where it comes from. Okay. So if the idea is that it's coming from lashon hara, so think about it. If a person committed lashon hara but not as extensive, then maybe he gets tzaras only partially, and he winds up quarantined. In that way, Hashem has given him a little reminder, a little flick on the ear. I don't know if they did that in your thing. A little flick on the ear to get his attention. Hopefully, during those 7 days of quarantine, he has introspection, and he realizes the things that he did was wrong, called lashon hara, and he'll do tshuva, and that way, at the end of the 7 days, when the Kohen comes to check on him again, he'll be healed. And he'll only need a minor purification process because he's already done the tshuva that he needed to do. The guy who becomes a mitzvah muchlet, he's completely and totally yared down the drain, and he got sent out of all 3 camps, and he's absolutely, completely tamei. He needs more time. That's why it takes him more time to heal, because his lashon hara has been really, really out of control. And so therefore he needs more time to be able to truly be able to repent and get his life back together spiritually. Then when he finally finishes going through that process and has brought himself back to the spiritual state where the tshuva is already well on its way, the tzaras heals, but then the purification process is a much longer and a more arduous one. And the shaving of the hair is part of that. Tzaras is a spiritual leprosy. Biblical leprosy.
It's a punishment for speaking evil.
Okay?
Can I ask one more question, Rabbi?
Oh, you can ask 2 more questions.
How come out of
Especially since you're one of the advertisers.
How come
That was an inside joke. Okay, go ahead.
No, please feel free to have it.
Yeah.
How come out of all of the sins of the Torah, lashon hara is the one where you have like an automatic punishment happening in the Torah? But
Unfortunately, later on, it got so bad that we didn't have an automatic punishment.
What do you mean?
But lashon hara is really, I'm sure are all aware of a great and holy tzaddik who lived early part of the 20th century. He was also your uncle. He was a Kohen. The Chafetz Chaim. You've all heard of him, I'm sure, right? The Chafetz Chaim was a great and holy sage. He wrote many books. And you could make the argument that, for instance, he wrote a book called the Mishnah Brura. Most Ashkenazi Jews today, or a very large segment of Ashkenazi Jews, their halachic application, in other words, the most recent application for them is the Mishnah Brura. But people don't know the Chafetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Brura. Did you know that?
No.
See? You didn't know it. You ever heard of the Mishnah Brura?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. You know it's the same author. You didn't know that, right?
No.
I like that. What is he more famous for?
His book.
Chafetz Chaim.
Yeah. Chafetz Chaim. Yeah.
That's why he's called the Chafetz Chaim. That wasn't his name. But he's more famous for his book, the Chafetz Chaim. Why did he write the book Chafetz Chaim? Do you know?
Not sure.
He wrote the book Chafetz Chaim is a comprehensive compendium of all the laws of lashon hara. That's what it is. All the laws of lashon hara. That's what it is. You know why he wrote it? He wrote Chafetz Chaim because he saw Lashon Hara as the ultimate sinat chinam, baseless hatred amongst Jews, manifested itself, in his view, in no worse a way than Lashon Hara. And since sinat chinam was what caused the destruction, baseless hatred of other Jews was what caused the destruction of the Second Temple, and therefore the only way to rectify the exile of the Second Temple, meaning he was singularly focused on the coming of Mashiach. He wrote the Chafetz Chaim because he felt that this was the book necessary to bring Mashiach. That's why he wrote it. And that's the book he's most famous for.
Why isn't it well known that he wrote the Mishnah Berurah? He's not.
It is.
He's not. It is.
It is well known.
Not well known to you.
Huh?
Not well known.
Not well known to you. The question you just asked me is the same Rebbe who taught you that there's such a thing as the Mishnah Berurah. Why did he not tell you that it's the same author as the Chafetz Chaim? That's a good question. You should ask him that.
He was more focused on the Shulchan Aruch. We were really into the Shulchan Aruch.
Okay. Sephardi rabbi.
Ashkenaz.
An Ashkenazi rabbi. And he didn't tell you that the Mishnah Berurah is the same rabbi as the Chafetz Chaim?
Maybe I'm just forgetting that.
Okay. He's a Litvak, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
What's the matter with these guys? The Litvaks are falling off the wagon.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. You need the Hasidim to tell you about the Litvish Gedolim? That makes no sense. Okay. That was just a joke. Chafetz Chaim was a special holy Jew. To answer your question, to come back to your question, Lashon Hara, think about it. The Chafetz Chaim saw Lashon Hara as the singular impediment to the coming of Mashiach. So you can see how weighty a sin it is. Okay. Let's get back to this now. Okay. So we'll finish the Mishnah now. There's no difference between the guy who's now going through a purification process after quarantine versus the guy who's going through a purification process after being an absolute Matzaras. Ella, the only difference is two things. Tiglachas v'tziparim. One is he has to shave his hair. Like I said, while he was impure, he was required to let his hair grow. And now when he's finished, he has to shave off all of his hair, all hair off his entire body. And the second was tziparim. The guy who becomes tamei completely, he's completely impure as a tzaras, he has to bring sacrifices. So we have two ein bains in this Mishnah, both discussing the difference between the quarantined tzaras versus the actual tzaras. The first one is in the aspect of their impurity, that the quarantined tzaras does not have to tear his garments and does not have to shave his hair, and does not have to let his hair grow, versus the absolute tzaras who has to let his hair grow and he has to rend his garment. And then secondly, in the purification process that they go through at the end of that time period, the guy who's purifying himself from quarantine does not have to shave his hair, whereas the guy who's purifying himself from complete tzaras does have to shave his hair, and the guy who's purifying himself from quarantine does not have to bring sacrifices, whereas the one who does have to bring sacrifices. Okay. Now for the Gemara. And again, this is all the same syntax as we've had in reference to all the previous laws that we did ein bain. The first thing the Gemara is going to say, that if the Mishnah says there is no difference between them other than, then that means that the Mishnah is telling us that everything else, they're equal. So the Gemara's first question always is, what's the everything else? What's the stuff that they're equal in? That's been every single one of these ein bain Mishnahs. That's been the way the Gemara starts. And let's get into it. However, le'inyan shiluach, being sent out of the camps, v'tuma, and the idea that they are actually impure, zev v'zeh shavin, we're saying they're both the same, right? That's what we're going to say. Because we didn't say that there's a difference between them. We didn't say there's a difference between what you asked the question, are they both sent to the same place? So, since the Mishnah doesn't differentiate between them, says the Gemara, that it must be they're both sent to the same place. They're both kicked out of the camp. And as far as their impurity, they're both impure. So the Gemara now says, Binani Mili, how do you know this? And what the question is, how do we know that the requirement to rend their garments and to let his hair grow only applies, in other words, since in both instances we're going to send them out of the camp, and since in both instances we're going to declare them impure, so how do you know that the guy who's in quarantine doesn't let his hair grow? How do you know the guy in quarantine doesn't tear his clothes? Only the guy who's complete. Where do you get that from? So the Gemara says, where do we get it from? The Tani we learned. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak Kami de Ravuna. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak taught the following exegesis from a pasuk in the Torah, and he said it in front of the great sage Rav Huna. The pasuk says, "V'tiaroi hakohen mispachas hi v'chibes begadav v'toher." So this is in the case of somebody who was only in quarantine, okay? And now he comes back, and it turns out it got smaller, or whatever. If it stays the same, he goes in quarantine for another week. But again, let's not complicate this. He was in quarantine for a week. He came back at the end of the week. It's gotten smaller. So the Torah says, if he was in quarantine for a week, he comes back, it's gotten smaller. The Kohen should now declare him pure. It's cleansed. And he says, mispachasi. It's only like, let's see, he doesn't even translate the word mispachas. It's like a lesion. Skin disease. But it's not tsaras. Okay? It's only like a lesion. We don't call this tsaras. It's just a different kind of lesion. But then the Torah continues and says, V'chibas begadav, he now has to wash his clothes, which means also he has to wash his own body, meaning he has to go to the mikveh. V'taher, and he's clean. So now we have the word v'taher twice in this verse. It's an extra word. What's the extra word v'taher? So Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says, he taught in front of Rav Huna. He said, what's the extra tahar? Tahar mipriya umifrima demiikara. He is cleansed that he does not have to that he was initially already cleansed and retroactively that he didn't have to rend his garments and let his hair grow. That's that extra v'tayr. That extra v'tayr tells you that retroactively he never had to do it in the first place. So Shmuel by Yitzchak says that's how we know that the quarantine mitzvah doesn't have to let his hair grow and doesn't have to. Along comes Rava and says that the way you derive that from that verse, I don't like it. Amalei Rava. So Rava says to him, Elamayata, if that's the case, Gabe Zav, we had last week, 2 weeks ago, we were studying about a Zav, a man who has strange emissions. The Chsiv, there also the verse says, V'chibes begadav v'taher. He will wash his clothes and go in the mikveh and he will be clean. Hasamai v'taher meikara, Ika. What retroactive purification is there by the Zav? Right? There's no retroactive tire. So how could you, in other words, if you're going to use the syntax of a verse and say that the extra word in this verse tells us that retroactively there are things that he's cleansed, then you have another place in the Torah when it's talking about Zov, the man with the emission, where it uses the same syntax. It says, V'chibas b'gad v'toher. That word v'toher also should be telling you that there's something retroactive, that is cleansed. What's the retroactive? It has to be consistent. The way you expound on verses in the Torah need to be consistent. So what's the consistency here? Ella. Instead, how would we read it? Tahar hashta miltame kleicheres behesit. Afagav dehad chazir. Lemitame lemafreya. Complicated laws of Zav. Zav, we said, if he has a number of emissions, then he has to count 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, he has to go to the mikveh. The guy who's a Zav, by the way, he's more impure than almost anybody. Actually, in many sense, even more impure than a dead body. Because he's the guy that if he sits on the top, remember we said this, if there's 10 mattresses piled up, he sits on the top mattress. Usually, if you put a dead body on that top mattress, then the first mattress that touched the dead body is one level of tumah. The second mattress underneath it is a lower level, and it keeps getting lower. The Zav is different. The Zav sits down on that top mattress, all of the mattresses become tummy, even though he didn't sit on it, and any of the lower ones. Just from sitting on that top one. So it's even stricter, right? So now, at the same thing, the Zav has what's called tumas hesed. The Zav can cause something to become tameh without ever actually touching it. How? Here's a simple example. The scales of justice, right? You've seen what scales used to look like, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you have a vessel on one side of the scale, and the Zav goes and pulls down the other side of the scale. So now this side of the scale moved. He never touched it. He only touched the side of the scale. That's called hesed, movement. The Zav course or seesaw, same thing. Gets on a seesaw, okay? Does anyone still go on seesaws? Do you even know what those are? You have a virtual seesaw on your phone, maybe?
My nephew.
Your nephew has a virtual seesaw. Okay. Does anyone go to the park anymore? You have only the virtual park on your phone. Oh, where are you? I'm in the park. Well, it doesn't look like it. No, I'm in the park. It's fine.
Virtual reality park.
Virtual reality park, exactly. Okay? Comes with smells and everything. Kids screaming. It's got the whole thing. Okay. So, the Zav, if he makes that other side move, it becomes Tameh. Even a clay cheres, an earthenware vessel, which is a lot of ball of wax, how you make it Tameh. Okay? So he can make it Tameh b'tumas hesed. Now, here's the story. Here's what happened. The Zav went through 7 days of cleansing, which he was required to do. On the 7th day, he's required to go to the mikveh. He is not actually pure until that night. And then the next day, which would be technically the 8th day, is when he has to bring his sacrifices. This is the Zav. The Mitzvah has similar laws. Now, what happens if the Zav counted 7 clean days? On the 7th day, he went to the mikveh. He's waiting for the day to end. And while he's waiting for the day to end, he has another emission. Ouch. So that undoes his 7 days. He has to start all over again. The 7-day count. So just so you understand the contrast, if the 7th day ends, okay, and the next day he has an emission, that's like emission number one. Remember, the Zav has to have 3 emissions before he counts the 7 days. Got it? So that will only be a singular emission. He doesn't have to count 7 days yet. He just go to the mikvah. It becomes like an initial emission. But if he has that emission on the 7th day, before the 7th day ended, after he went to the mikvah, it ruins his whole 7 days. So now let's get really complicated. It's the 7th day of his counting. He already went to the mikvah. Technically, he's pure. Only thing he still needs is Adam Shemesh. The sun needs to go down. That's the only thing he's missing. And then he's done with his process. Okay? In the meantime, he's playing with a scale. The earthenware vessel on this other side of the scale should be okay. Why? Because he already counted 7 days. And he went to the mikvah. But now after he did that with the earthenware vessel, he has another emission, which undoes all of his 7 days that he was counting. So now what happens to that earthenware vessel? Because before he went to the mikvah on the 7th day, if he would have made an earthenware vessel move anytime during his 7 days of counting, he would have rendered that earthenware vessel impure. But now he moved the earthenware vessel after he's already in the 7th day, after he already went to the mikvah. So technically he should be okay. But then he has another emission that undoes the 7 days of counting. Is your head spinning yet? I should warn you, the average 9-year-old in yeshiva is able to follow this discussion. I should warn you. Okay? And now he has another emission. What happens to that vessel? Do we say retroactively that since his 7 days have now been undone, that vessel is now impure? Or do we say when he touched the vessel, or whatever contact he had with it, he was pure? So do we say that technically, since his 7 days weren't over yet, and now his 7 days are ruined, that even then he wasn't really pure when he went to the mikvah? After he went to the mikvah. You got the conundrum? Along comes Rav and says, he is pure now and does not make that earthenware vessel tamei, even though subsequently he'll have another emission. It's not going to retroactively make that earthenware vessel tamei. Hachanami, says Rava, what is the tahor in the verse in reference to the Mitzorah? That it's going to affect the way he doesn't convey tumah. He's cleansed from this point forward from conveying tumah retroactively through entering a house. In other words, the Metzorah now has finished counting his 7 days, and it looks like he's gotten better. And he also has to go to the mikvah on that 7th day. And now after he went to the mikvah, he walks into a house. Because anything, when the Metzorah walks into a house, the whole house becomes tamei. Okay? So now what happened? The Metzorah walked into a house after he went to the mikvah on the 7th day, and then after he leaves the house, he realizes that unfortunately his tzaraas has spread again. Because some people just can't stop talking Lashon Hara. Right? It's like the alcoholic. You can put him in a rehab center, for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And, and there he's being policed, right? The alcoholic, the drug addict, whatever. There he's being policed to make sure that he doesn't do anything. But the real test of whether or not his rehab did anything is when he walks back out into the world, right? Can he go past the bar, not get a drink, or et cetera, et cetera? That's when it's the real test. So here's the tzaras. We put him in quarantine. He was so bad off, he was so far down the tubes that he became an actual tzaras, a complete, not just a quarantine tzaras, but an actual tzaras. He went through an extensive tshuva process while he was stuck wherever it was that he was stuck. We let him out because it's healed. And now he walks into and counts the 7 days, goes to the mikveh, walks inside the house, and the first thing he does, I was talking Lashon Hara again, walks out the door, tzaras is back. So now what happens to the house? What happens to the house? Because when he went into the house, it was after he went to the mikveh, before the tzaras spread again. So we're going to say that just like we said about the earthenware vessel, that once he goes to the mikveh, even Barizov, but once he goes to the mikveh, the earthenware vessel is not retroactively impure. The same thing we're going to say here, the house is not retroactively impure. But in either instance, since that's what these two verses now mean, it doesn't answer our original question, which was, how do we know that a quarantined mitzvah doesn't need to let his hair grow and rend his garments? Now we're back to square one. That's really where we got back there to the question. We digressed by talking about the Zav. Okay? So Rava, who just disproved Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak's point, says, I have a different verse that you can learn it out from. Where? He says, a different verse. Instead, we learn it from here. V'hatzarua asher boi hanega. The person stricken. Let's see how that. I always like to look at the art scroll for the exact translation of the verse. I like the way they translate the verse. They translate as follows: Hatzarua asher boi hanega, and the person in whom there is the tzaras affliction. And if you're looking in the art scroll, they fill in the rest of the verse here in the non-bold letters. His garments need to be torn, and the hair of his head shall be unshorn. In the actual verse that tells us this law that the tzaras has to let his hair grow and rend his garments. So the verse says Asher bo hanega, that he is a tzaras in him, in his body. And what are we going to derive from that? We're talking about when we impose this idea that he has to let his hair grow and that he has to rend his garments. That's only on someone whose tzaras is dependent on his body. This would exclude the guy who's in quarantine. Why? His tzaras is not about his body. It's a calendar issue. In other words, the guy who's a complete tzaras, we look at his body, he has all three signs of tzaras. He's a tzaras, boom. The guy we put in quarantine, we want to see what's going to happen in 7 days. So it's no longer about his body, now it's about what's going to happen all the time. So it's a time factor. So Rava says, since the Torah uses the words asher bo, that are in him, so only the guy that it's totally in his body, the whole tzaras, is dependent upon his body, that guy needs to rend his garments and needs to let his hair grow. But the guy who we're dealing with a time factor, which is the quarantine tzaras, if him, that doesn't count. Satisfactory? No. We're just warming up. Along comes Abaye. You know, Abaye and Rava were best friends, but they agreed on almost nothing. Almost everywhere you're going to see in the Gemara, if you find Rava, you're going to find Abaye arguing on him. If you find Abaya, Rav is going to be arguing on him.
What's Abaya?
These are two guys. That was their names.
Mm.
And they were disciples of Rabba Bar Nachmani, who was one of the greatest sages of the Gemara. Second. Okay, so I see the problem with this new camera and this new app is that the screen, when we were using the Windows camera, so the screen doesn't go to sleep. But on this app, unless you keep an eye on it, the Windows will go to sleep and I'll shut off the microphone. Okay, whatever. We'll figure it out. More technical things to work on. I don't know. So Abaye and Rava almost always disagree. In fact, the Gemara says that when they were kids, they were still kids studying under Rabba already. They were already studying under Rabba. One day, Rabba looked at these two kids and he said, "Where is Hashem? Where's Hashem?" I wanted to see how they would respond. So Abaye pointed up. And Rava pointed down. They were kids in class. They were kids. Rabba asked him, "Where is Hashem?" Abaye pointed up, Rava pointed down. So the Gemara says about that story, Butzin bekatva yediyah. The pumpkins, you can already tell what kind of pumpkin it's going to grow into when it's still just a small bud. You already know what these pumpkins are going to look like. Meaning that even when they were little kids, it was obvious that these two guys are going to grow up to be great sages and that they're going to agree on nothing. Even where is Hashem, they couldn't agree on. One pointed up, the other pointed down. Okay, that's Abaye and Rava. So Rava is the one who just gave us this exposition and told us that where do we get it from? Asher bo, that it has to be within his body. That only somebody within his body has to let his hair grow and has to rend his garments. But somebody who it's not about his body, it's about days, counting days, him not. Along comes Abaye and says, "I don't think so." I have a question on that. Where are we here? So Abaye says to him, if that's the case, I got another verse. Kol yemei asher hanega bo yitma. And that's speaking about all tzaras, that we're going to kick him out of the camp. And we agreed before, at the beginning of the Gemara, that even the quarantined Mitzorah has to get sent out of the camp, right? So this is about everybody. So aren't you also going to say the same bo? And therefore, maybe only the guy whose tzara is in his body, who the ton shiluach, that he's the guy that needs to be kicked out of the camp. But if the tzara is not in his body, only in days, maybe we don't have to kick him out. Yeah? Continues Abaye. Are you going to respond? Yeah, that's true. That's true. No. For Aktani, we learned in the Mishnah, that there's no difference between the quarantine Mitzorah and the absolute Mitzorah other than the growing of the hair and the rending of the garments. And therefore, we said right at the beginning of the Gemara that when we were looking for what is the commonality between the two, it's that they're both sent out of the camp, or l'tmuyin, that they become babiyah. When it comes to shluch, l'tmuyin, babiyah, zev is Hashem, and they're both the same. Right? Okay. So that's Abaye's response to Rava. In other words, if you're going to say that Asher Bo excludes the quarantined Mitzorah, then Asher Bo should also exclude the quarantined Mitzorah from being sent out of the camp. And we know for sure that the quarantined Mitzorah is also sent out of the camp. So he has a problem with Rava's expounding it. Oh, comes Rava. No, I'm not done yet. I can get you back. Rava responds, Amalei. He responds, Yemei, Kol Yemei. The Torah says, Kol Yemei, all the days of his Mitzvah, he has to be outside the camp. All is an extra word. The Torah only had to say Yemei. During the time that he's a Mitzvah, he has to be outside the camp. Why does it have to say all the days? The word all is extra. You know what it does? That word all is inclusive. You're right. In other words, Rava says the word asher bo would be excluding the quarantine mitzvah from having to leave the camp. That exclusion, you're right. But there's an extra word kol that then brings him back in, it includes him. So you have an exclusion and inclusion, you work out even, and now the quarantine guy has to leave the camp. Ihachi, then in that case, Abaya says back, Tiglachas v'tziporim loim ama'itayim aloi. Then in that case, if you're going to include him back with the word kol, yeah, then why doesn't if you're including him, why not include him in everything? The quarantined mitzvah should also have to bring sacrifices. How come he doesn't bring sacrifices? Yeah? The Tanya of the Mishnah said clearly, Ein min Torah mitech Cheskel Torah mitech Achatal l'skach v'tzipurim. Amar Abayis, so Abayis says, Amar Kra, the verse says, V'yotza hakohen omichutz lamachana. The Kohen will go outside the camp, V'hine nirpa nega hatzaras, and behold, the tzaras has healed. So that says, and then afterwards the Torah continues, that guy now has to bring birds, sacrifices, etc., etc., etc. So we derive from that it healed Misha Tzarat the Kliya B'Refuos. Only the person whose cleansing, whose purification from Tzaras is dependent upon healing. Yatzazeh, this would exclude the guy who was quarantined. Shein Tzarat the Kliya B'Refuos. His cleansing from the Tzaras is not dependent upon healing Ela B'Yamim. Because if he goes through 2 sets of 7 days and it never spreads, we send him home. So he's in days, not actual healing. He doesn't have to actually heal. So Abaya ultimately is supporting Rava here. He's following through and answering for Rava. So even though he first asked the question, he ultimately accepts Rava's response and supports it. I see you and I raise you. I don't even really know what that means, by the way. I know it has something to do with cards, but I'm not sure. We're done. We're done with Saras. We're now going to go into a much more interesting, maybe more interesting or reasonable topic. The next Ein Bain is the next Mishnah. I think by now everybody's head is spinning, so I think we're going to stop tonight. We're not going to start the next Mishnah. Am I right? This was complicated, no?
The last bit felt like a sprint, yeah.
Okay. So it was complicated. It was complicated. The next ones aren't going to be as complicated. It's going to get much, it's a little bit easier. And the next discussion is going to be what languages and what script are allowed to be used for Torahs, Tefillin, and Mezuzot. It's actually a very interesting discussion. And that's going to be the next Mishnah that we'll approach next week in how scribal writing, etc. Which ones you have to, what you're allowed to, what you're not allowed to, when you're allowed to use Greek, ancient Greek. Latin really means not Greek.
There's times where you could use ancient Greek Latin
For certain things. We're going to see it in the next Mishnah.
like in mezuzah.
Not see mezuzah. That's going to be the thing. Ain bain. The only difference between them is that tefillin and mezuzahs. No, never. That's what we're going to see. I think, and now then I'll tell a story that I don't want on the air. Thank you very much for joining us. Are we advertising dentists and eye doctors? I don't know. No. Maybe next week. Time, everybody.